This is the circuit where championships have been won and legends have been made, but Formula One has never visited Suzuka this early in a season or this early in the year. It is Sakura season. The cherry blossoms are out here at the majestic Suzuka circuit for the Japanese Grand Prix. Hello folks and welcome to your weekend warm-up with me and him, where he is Lawrence Barretto and I am Will Buxton, and it is great to be back in Japan.
Oh, it's so good. I love Japan anyway. Visiting here, the people are great, the food is great, the circuit is great. But coming here in the springtime with the cherry blossoms out makes the country even more beautiful. The fans have been here already. It's media day. I saw them streaming into the circuit this morning. They had 3 hours in this pit lane to kind of have a look at the garages. They just do this event really, really well around here.
They do. It is much cooler than we are used to here. We landed yesterday to torrential rain. It should be dry for most of this weekend, but rain is forecast again for race day itself on Sunday. But we've got so much to discuss, so much to talk before we get on to the topic of the weather and of the Grand Prix itself. Lawrence, media day, always so busy here at the circuit. And after the Australian Grand Prix, a lot to dissect, a lot to talk through. Of course, Max Verstappen is still your World Championship leader, but only by 4 points after he DNF'd. And we're back at Suzuka after Carlos Sainz has stopped that incredible Max Verstappen run. He did it last year in Singapore. He did it this year in Australia.
Yeah, I think it was Christian Horner who was saying that Carlos Sainz has become Max Verstappen's nemesis, hasn't he? Kind of stopping that run. Carlos is very much a driver in form, and he heads here hopeful to continue that. But I was talking to him earlier, and he was saying, look, this is a Max Verstappen circuit. This is a Red Bull circuit. And Max was pretty confident when he was talking in the presser. But he's going to want to get down to business and reassert his authority on this championship. Because like you were saying, the championship's close.
Yeah.
And he hasn't got that cushion like he had this time last year when he came here and off that back of that defeat in Singapore.
And of course, Carlos Sainz wins, which means a George Russell DNF. And I'm giving you all of the tips because it's time for the 60-second recap. Lawrence Barretto, are you ready?
Okay, I'll give it a good go. Max Verstappen started on pole position. Carlos Sainz, incredible effort to get the front row of the grid alongside him in P2 after that surgery 16 days ago. Carlos put a ton of pressure on him over the first lap and a half and actually passed Max on pure performance. Also, we thought, because it later emerged that there was smoke coming out of Max Verstappen's Red Bull, and it was the brake disc that had actually stuck to the brake pad, exploded as we just saw there in the pit lane. That put him out of the race. First time that Max had retired for more than 2 years. Further back, you had Charles Leclerc kind of pushing up front. The Ferraris looked very strong here, and the McLarens looked strong too. Checo Perez didn't really step up, did he? And couldn't really kind of get that podium position or a win that Red Bull really would want him to do so. We had a good little battle between the McLarens. I say battle, actually the team asked Oscar Piastri to move over for Lando Norris, who was quicker, and that was a heartbreak for the McLaren fans, because obviously it was home Grand Prix for Oscar Piastri. We just saw there George Russell had that crash when he was chasing Fernando Alonso. Alonso crossed the line in P6, demoted to P8 after the checkered flag. You had a podium of Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris.
I'd say that's about 70 seconds, but better than I could do. Well done. Quite an action-packed Australian Grand Prix there. Of course, a double DNF for Mercedes, but the big story, Carlos Sainz returning from having his appendix taken out to really dominating that race. He is the man that everybody is talking about in the paddock this weekend because, of course, he's jobless right now, and he made that point after the Grand Prix. I am jobless. And he's putting in great performances like that. And if it wasn't for taking off the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix for having his appendix taken out, I'd say would probably be leading the World Championship right now.
He probably would be leading the World Championship, and that win really couldn't have come at a better time for Carlos. Like you said, out of a seat for next year. There are 13, I think, available. But at the moment, it's unclear whether he's going to end up at Red Bull, a Mercedes, an Aston Martin, maybe it's Sauber before they become Audi. So that kind of win puts a little bit of pressure, I think, on the other teams to try and make that decision a little bit sooner, because Carlos doesn't want to hang about.
No.
He wants to nail his future down as soon as possible, and he wants to get the best available seat. You would have thought he's going to want a seat that can kind of give him a car that can win races, because what, he's turning 30 this year. He's got to be sensible about what he's looking for in the next couple of years. Probably doesn't want so much of a project. And so he wants to look at the projects like Red Bull, like Aston Martin, like Merc, that can give him that car to get the very best out of him. Because at the minute, who is performing better than Carlos Sainz aside from Max Verstappen? He is in the form of his life.
Fair. He spoke to the press earlier today.
Carlos, can we come to you now? Quick health update. Are you back to 100% fitness now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, been riding my bike this week. Stayed in Australia for a week and started going back to the gym. Still, obviously, not lifting heavy numbers like I used to do in the past, but at least I can get my training done, and I'm feeling back to 100%. Yeah.
And what about performance? Great weekend in Melbourne, obviously. Can you maintain that here at Suzuka?
Well, we'll see. No, I think it's important, like I've always said in the past, no, to turn the page quickly, in the good and in the bad. I think obviously coming from a good is more difficult to turn the page because you want to stay enjoying the moment. But I turned it on Monday, started focusing my training and being back as fit as possible for Japan. Also because it's going to be a challenging track for us. I think last year was one of our most challenging ones in reference to a Red Bull. We were, I think, 7 or 8 tenths off 4 or 5 months ago here. So it's time to see where we are this year and see if we can be at least closer and enjoy a bit more this amazing track than what we enjoyed it last year, because for me it's one of my favorite ones, if not my favorite.
Great to hear from Carlos Sainz, who, as you say, is performing at such a high level. I was joking with him on text in the week, and I said, who needs an appendix? Anyway.
You know what? He's carrying around an appendix keyring, so he still needs a kind of appendix. It's just on a little keyring.
I love it. Well, and the fun part is, of course, is that he must be much lighter now that he doesn't have his appendix. But we were joking about that. We worked it out. It only equates to about 0.003 of a second.
Every little helps, though.
So every little helps. The rest of it's all Carlos. You can hear more from him later in the weekend, your pre-race show, an interview between Lawrence and Carlos. Now, Charles Leclerc. He's second in the World Championship, 4 points behind Max Verstappen, also doing a great job. They were so closely matched all the way through last year, closely matched again this year. But Charles saying today he wouldn't have, I don't think, fought for the win in Australia. The team said don't fight for it, but he felt that Carlos had the upper hand on him.
I think Charles is in a really interesting position at the minute because he had a decent result, but actually in terms of how he feels inside the car, he doesn't feel very confident. He doesn't feel like he's getting the most out of it. He doesn't feel like he's nailing the setup early in the weekends. And because of that, that's probably why he was talking about not being able to win in Australia. So I think when he starts to unlock all of that potential, gets a bit more comfortable with the car, be a bit more on par, then I think we'll see him fighting Carlos a little bit harder. But at the minute, Carlos seems to have taken to a duck to water with this Ferrari and seems the more comfortable of the two.
It's confidence for Carlos, isn't it?
Oh, it's always confidence. He's a confidence driver. I think we saw that all the way through his time at McLaren, through that time at Toro Rosso as well. When he feels like he's got a car underneath him that does what he wants it to do, he's almost 100% consistent in getting the very best result out of the car. I think we've seen that throughout his career, and we're seeing that right now.
So even having missed that race in Saudi Arabia, Carlos Sainz is just 11 points off the championship lead. We arrive here in Suzuka, and this is what the championship standings look like. Of course, Max Verstappen up at the top, but by a very reduced margin of just those 4 points. Sergio Perez 1 further point behind Charles Leclerc in third. Then it's Sainz, Piastri on 28, 1 point ahead of Lando Norris on 27. Then Russell, Alonso, Stroll and Hamilton. And Lawrence, as we've been discussing all the way through this year, those top 5 teams so closely matched, so little between them, and a real kind of gap between them and the remainder of the field. But that's your top 10 from your top 5 teams.
Yeah, and I think what's really exciting is we've had those 4 teams behind Red Bull last year really close together, whereas the difference is this year, if you put a little bit of pressure on Red Bull, or they make a mistake, those teams are there to capitalise. And I think that's what makes these next few races exciting, that if Red Bull aren't on the top of their game, if they have those reliability problems, or if they are put under pressure, they can make mistakes. And I think that's what we should be excited about coming into Japan, China, Miami, the next couple of races.
Yeah, I mean, it took until Singapore last year for Red Bull to get beaten.
Yep.
And it's only taken 3 races this year. McLaren ended last season as, aside from Red Bull, the team to beat, probably the second fastest on merit out there. They aren't this year, but they were on the podium last time out in Australia with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri having a great race as well. But a tumultuous start to the season for them once again, Lawrence. News during the week of a shake-up within the technical department. Once again, at pretty much the same time as it was last year.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of chatter, a lot of hope when they brought David Sanchez on board from Ferrari. They brought him alongside Rob Marshall from Red Bull. They changed this technical structure to have 3 pillars underneath Andrea Stella. This was the future, and then it seems like it's become clear that David Sanchez's role wasn't quite what he signed up for, what the team thought it was going to kind of unfold, and they've moved things around. Rob Marshall was now the clear chief designer. They've moved some responsibilities around. Andrea Stella is looking after the performance side of things until they work out what they're going to do. But I do think these are little things. They're the little changes where I do feel like Andrea's kind of got control of the car at the minute. I feel like the team are still in a good position. I think you and I were talking earlier about how the team say there's some problems they need to fix that might take the whole year. Not ideal, but still they're still getting a podium in Australia. They still come here, a circuit where they perform very strongly, as the 2nd or 3rd best team. Look, if they got problems to fix and they're in that position, I think they'd be pretty happy.
This is it. Lando was saying something very similar earlier today when I spoke to him. He said, it's not been the start of the season that you might have hoped for. He's like, no. Actually, we're really feeling pretty good about where we're at. But particularly here, they're strong in the high-speed stuff. And this circuit, with a couple of slow speed exceptions, is all about the medium, high-speed, long-flowing sections, the famous 130R, of course. We know this is a high-speed circuit. Could this be a weekend where McLaren find themselves back up at the top and gunning for a podium?
I do think so. I think if you ask Ferrari, they'll say that McLaren are a greater threat to Red Bull here this weekend. I think Red Bull are generally considered the favourites. But I think McLaren, especially when you've got Lando and Oscar operating at a very high level together, if you've got a Checo who's not delivering, that's what the kind of pincer movement that you maybe need to put some pressure on Max. And then if you've got Carlos and Charles performing strongly, that's even more pressure, isn't it, on a Red Bull team that have shown that if you put them under pressure, they might just crack.
Beautiful new livery on the McLaren this weekend. Japanese artist Miltz, I believe is the correct way to pronounce that, has designed a stunning livery on the McLaren, which Lando Norris will be piloting around this phenomenal Suzuka circuit. Lando, 2 weeks on from a pretty decent result in Australia. Was that a bit of the shot in the arm that the team needed?
It helps. It's not. I don't think we needed it, but it's always welcome. And yeah, the team did a great job. It was a good weekend for us, and it's just a boost. Motivates everyone to want it more than just once. So it's a good kind of kickstart to the start of the year. So it was a good weekend.
Good. Is there any frustration in the team that, after that incredible strong end to last season, that you weren't quite able to pick up kind of where you left off at the end of last year?
No, I think we have. I think we've done exactly that. I think Ferrari have taken a bigger step. So when we're just comparing to Ferrari, I think Ferrari done a very good job, and hats off to them. But our gaps to Red Bull, our gaps to everyone else, like our gap to Red Bull is probably smaller, and our gap to everyone else behind is probably bigger. So no, I think I'm very happy with how we've done. Of course, you always want to be the closest to Red Bull and the team fighting. But Ferrari were very good last year. They had 6 pole positions or even more. They were always very quick. And as much as we were the 2nd quickest team throughout the end of last year on average, there were still plenty of races we were a lot slower than Ferrari. So Ferrari have just improved in certain places like the high speed, and now they're an extremely competitive car. But they've always been one of the best in slow speed for years. They've just always struggled in high speed. Now they've improved it there where they should be. So, and we have the opposite problem. We're very good in high speed, always have been, but we struggle in the slow speed, and that's what we're trying to improve. So no, I'm very happy. I don't think that's the case at all. I'm confident we're making good progress, and we've started exactly how we want to.
It's good to hear from Lando Norris there, a driver who is under contract for next year alongside Oscar Piastri, one of the few teams that won't be making any changes to their lineup for 2025. Right, you mentioned him earlier. Sergio Perez. Great first 2 races, doing exactly what was expected of him, finishing 2nd behind Max Verstappen. But we deem that that's his job, that's his role, is to be there when things go wrong for Max. And yet in Australia, he wasn't. Had the penalty after qualifying, which dropped him back down the grid. Then there was talk about a bit of damage to his car during the Grand Prix, but he himself said, and I spoke to him earlier today, ultimately they went the wrong direction and they were just absolutely gunning their tyres, and because of that just didn't feel comfortable during the Grand Prix itself. With that in mind, do we think that Max would have struggled as well to have fought, or was that a Checo-only issue?
I think generally Max has had a margin on Checo and just the general way that car operates. So I think even if Max has struggled slightly, I think he maybe been able to mask it slightly more than Checo has done. That said, you mentioned how well Checo's done in these first couple of races. It's because he's fundamentally more comfortable with the car. He starts off on a better kind of rhythm through the weekend, and I think because he got lost essentially on that weekend, that kind of maybe made it look slightly worse than it was. But I do think it's interesting that he comes here again on the back of a race where it wasn't to the Red Bull's liking. You know, they wanted him to step up. A podium should have been a minimum, really, for him when a Max Verstappen doesn't finish, and he didn't deliver that. So the pressure's a little bit more on him here, but I think he can take a bit more confidence in the fact that he does seem to understand this Red Bull a bit more this year. And so if he can start the weekend strongly, people are going to forget about that week in Australia pretty quickly.
Yeah, he says he reckons that Red Bull will be susceptible at most front-limited circuits if they don't get on top of the tyre problems they've got at the moment. Lawrence, after the first 2 races, if you'd have asked me, I think Checo would be surefire to re-sign for Red Bull for next year. After the 3rd Grand Prix in Australia, where, as you say, he under-delivered, question marks again being raised about his place at the team for next year. Christian Horner openly flirting with the possibility of bringing Carlos Sainz back into the fold. Is Checo safe? Or are Red Bull looking elsewhere?
I don't think anyone in that second seat is ever going to be safe alongside Max Verstappen. I do feel for Checo because, like you said, he's done the job that they wanted in the first couple of races, and yet this speculation arises. But the fact of the matter is he needs to be consistent. He needs to be delivering those performances every single weekend, and he didn't do that in Australia. And then you've got a performance like Carlos Sainz, 16 days off the surgery table, goes to win the Grand Prix in a car that arguably wasn't the best around Australia. Then of course it's going to put the pressure. It's really interesting that Christian even mentioned Carlos's name. I do believe that Red Bull is a possibility. I do believe that Red Bull are interested in potentially bringing Carlos Sainz, but they have got their choice, haven't they, of drivers for that seat.
And the choice may be even larger if Max Verstappen ultimately decides to leave. This is the thing with the driver market this year, and what we saw with Lewis leaving Mercedes is that even the seats that we assumed were locked in might not be. There are clauses if certain people end up leaving Red Bull that may leave Max Verstappen as a free agent, and if Max goes, the entire driver market implodes. How much do you think the rest of this paddock is ultimately waiting on that Max Verstappen decision as to whether he stays or goes?
So I've talked to 3 driver managers today, and they all said that thing. They're all waiting on Max Verstappen and what is going to happen to him, which is ironic given he's already got a contract till the end of 2028. One described the driver market as a bit of a mess because at the minute there are so many permutations that it depends on where one driver slots in one position before the rest of it kind of plays out. And until we get that first move, it's so difficult to call.
Do you think Red Bull will, if Max leaves, do you think they'd make the move? The much vaunted, much highly anticipated move for Lando Norris that they've been trying to make for years?
You know, history suggests, of course, they're going to have a go at Lando. Why would they not have a go at Lando? They've been trying basically every single year. And yeah, OK, he's got a contract to McLaren, but that hasn't really stopped them in the past. And why would they not try to go after the driver they really want? And, you know, Lando's thinking will probably change slightly if Max isn't at the team. I know he's very happy at McLaren. He calls them their family. And I'm sure at this moment in time he sees himself there, but he doesn't know what's going to happen when the phone goes, does he?
Well,
and how he's going to feel.
Lewis said the same about Mercedes, didn't he? But off he goes to Ferrari. Who steps into that seat? Still one of the big questions. I think we both think it's going to be Antonelli. But a difficult race for Mercedes in Australia. Double DNF for them. Obviously, Lewis with that engine issue. George with the contact at the end. I was going to say contact with Fernando. It wasn't. It was just a contact with the barrier. So here's the replay of Lewis. A difficult weekend for Mercedes, a difficult start to the season. Do they just have to write off this rules era and just focus now on 2026? Or do you think they can actually turn this around?
They're just a brand that can't afford to write it off. They've got to be delivering or throw everything at it to try and find a solution. But it is getting that feeling that they can't quite get on top of these ground effect cars, and it's not the work of a moment. They freely admit that. Lewis was talking in Australia about how this car isn't the evil sister of the last 2, and even today he was talking about being more optimistic about getting something out of this car. But we're talking about little steps, right? We're not talking about finding the magic bullet or the silver bullet like Toto always talks about that's going to bring them into contention. So it kind of feels like Mercedes might be trailing for the foreseeable, and that must be really hard for George particularly because he's going to be at the team for a while, but Lewis for the final season who wants to go out on a high.
Saw quotes out of Toto saying, I wanted to punch myself in the nose. He's changed his plans to be here this week. He wasn't due to be coming to the Japanese Grand Prix. Also quotes out of him saying Lewis isn't looking over the fence at Ferrari. He's not looking towards them. But it kind of feels like when those statements come out, you almost feel that it's because he is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know
you
what
don't
you
make
mean.
those kind of comments unless you're trying to diminish the perception of something that is actually happening.
Make no mistake, this is the hardest point in Toto Wolff's career since he joined Mercedes. Like, he's never had difficulties like he's encountering now. It's never gone on for this long. He's always seemed to kind of weather the storm, or the team have, under his leadership. So I'm not surprised really that they're struggling. So he's struggling so much at the minute to kind of get on top of these things. That's why he's coming here, like you said, to Japan. Lewis said earlier that he's completely focused on getting the job done here at Mercedes, but how can he not be looking at Ferrari? Because he's got to be looking at his next chapter, right? And he wants to hit the ground running at Ferrari and make a real splash when he gets there.
We do, of course, have to talk about the race-ending incident for George Russell at the end of the Australian Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso slapped with a post-race penalty for dangerous driving or reckless driving. That's the incident. That's what happened. George got all caught up and into the barrier. Lawrence, was it a brake test, or did George just get spooked a la Singapore last year and following another car and put it in the wall?
Well, when George was talking today, he was saying he'd been looking down at his steering wheel at that point every time he'd got to that corner just to make a little adjustment. And this time when he looked back up, the car wasn't in front of him, wasn't 500 metres in front, it was right on the gearbox of it. So from George's perspective, he got caught out in that moment in time. Fernando reacted slightly differently. Look, it's up to the stewards to decide whether or not it was the right or the wrong thing. They gave him, Fernando Alonso, the penalty. But I think when George was talking today, he did say, look, if they hadn't have given a penalty, it might have sent a dangerous precedent going forward.
But there is a division between the drivers in this paddock. Some who think that it was absolutely right to penalise Fernando, some who think that this is actually over-regulation gone mad, and that you are ultimately taking the tools away from the drivers to be able to determine how they defend their position. Let's not forget Max Verstappen's first Grand Prix victory back in Barcelona all those years ago came from doing precisely that, admittedly not just on the last lap, but every lap in order to keep Kimi Raikkonen at bay, in order to make him kind of have to back out through that final sector so he couldn't get in DRS range down the start-finish straight. Are we in danger of restricting a driver's ability to defend if you're penalising their ability to drive and to brake where and when they want?
I guess if you'd asked the stewards, they would say that they were going to be tougher this year, and so maybe they're just sticking to that plan of maybe being a bit more forceful in their decision making. I guess if you ask the straw poll of drivers on any subject, they're never all going to agree anyway, are they? I think we need to see a couple more examples, further down the line, and see how those stewards respond if we get a similar scenario, and then maybe look at a bigger sample and see where we go from there.
Let's hear then from Fernando Alonso, who I spoke to earlier today about that penalty and his thoughts on it. Fernando, you say you have to accept the decision. Does that mean that you accept that you drove in a way that was potentially dangerous?
Not at all. I mean, I'm totally against, what was the outcome of the decisions, but they have the power to do and to decide, and we have to accept it. But I'm surprised and totally disagree for sure.
So that means you have to accept that they're taking tools away from you in that respect, your ability to defend, to choose your braking point, to choose your line?
Well, I think it was one-off. It will never be repeated the same, and I think we will never see a decision like in Australia ever again. So I accept it, I take it. I had few of those, too many of those in my career, and hopefully, or at least no one else is having this kind of outcomes. So I take it.
The other drivers have said it's going to be discussed this weekend in the drivers' briefing. What do you expect to come out of that? A bit more clarity from the FIA over what is and isn't allowable?
I guess so. Obviously, they will try to explain and to have some guidelines for all of us. But I think it will be difficult to agree. We are all 20 drivers. We have all 20 different opinions probably, but they have the power to decide, and we have to accept it. And there is nothing we can do. And it's no point, obviously, also to go back and to discuss too many things. So we move on, and hopefully we are a little bit more far apart, the cars here.
20 different drivers, 20 different opinions. I'll give you a 21st. Martin Brundle, our colleague here in Formula One, in an article after the Australian Grand Prix, said that was right out of the Fernando Alonso playbook. He's been doing that to drivers like David Coulthard. for 20 years or more. Was it a brake test? As the steward said, I think, regardless of intent, the penalty stands. Aston Martin. They're not having the start to the season that they did last year, but that top 5 teams is so condensed, so compacted. They will be hoping for upgrades. I know a lot of the teams have got upgrades this weekend. I don't believe Aston Martin have got anything for the moment, or have they this weekend? You know,
we'll find out tomorrow, won't we?
Find that out. Actually, no, you know what? They do. Just as well, I'm on pit lane reporting duty this weekend. We'll bring that to you during free practice 1. But a lot of talk around this team at the moment, not least, will Fernando stay or will Fernando go? Might Carlos Sainz end up here next year? Might Adrian Newey? That was the big story during the week.
Yeah, there was that story. Lawrence Stroll reportedly going after Adrian Newey, the greatest designer Formula 1 has ever seen.
So's Fred Vasseur, though.
This is true.
So's everyone.
I think the reality is, in Formula 1, all teams are always trying to get the very best personnel, whether that's in the design office, whether it's in an engineering side. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. The question is, does Adrian Newey want to leave? And does he want to go to Aston Martin? And if he's got all the options on the table, Aston Martin, staying at Red Bull, going to Ferrari, which one's he going to choose? Look, if I was Adrian Newey, I'd be pretty delighted with that set of options, wouldn't you?
But this is a good option for driver, for designer. They're getting that Honda Power Unit in 2026. They could have a really solid foundation to launch into the new regs.
Well, they have that brand new factory, haven't they,
Yep.
up and running, the wind tunnel, the simulator. It's a project where budget obviously is no option. It could be quite a fun thing to turn around for Adrian Newey. That will be any engineer they're going after will kind of look at Aston Martin as a really exciting, enticing product to get their teeth stuck into. What I'd be really impressed by from the outside, though, is the way that Aston have progressed, haven't they? And they continue to progress, and maybe not at the speed that Lawrence Stroll would hope so, but they're in that bracket of 5, top 5, maybe not pushing as high as they want to, but if they're scoring consistently, they're in a good space. This is only really year 2 or 3 of their real push-in project. I think they're in a good space right now.
Not in a good space. Alpine, horrible start to the season, although Esteban Ocon sounded some words of positivity after Australia that he felt they could have been in the points had he not had that brake issue with the visor tear-off strip lodging itself in there and forcing him to have another pit stop. Is that a genuine kind of silver lining to the cloud that's there right now? I know they've got a weight reduction on the car this weekend, their first major upgrade of the season.
Well, so I think that's one good thing that Alpine can hang on to, is when you've got an overweight car, it's low-hanging fruit, isn't it, to take the weight off, and you're going to get free lap time, essentially. And, you know, Pierre was talking earlier about, I think it's a small step, so let's not get too excited about kind of the improvements they made to that car this weekend. I was intrigued to see that Esteban was saying that, you know, they could have scored points in Melbourne. Though I think if you talk to anyone downwards from 6, they thought they could have got points if the race had kind of gone the way they were. I think Alpine are in a difficult spot. I think they know it's going to take time, possibly the whole season, to get on top of these things. But if they are bringing these little changes, like they are here, like you said, to bring the weight off, that means they're moving in a step forward, and they've got to keep the drivers motivated, they've got to keep the team motivated, they've got to keep showing that they are doing a better job from one weekend to another. And in Australia, you've got Yuki Tsunoda, got that P7. If you have a good, strong, clean weekend, you might nab a point anyway. Haas are a great example as well, aren't they?
Haas are a great example of that in a midfield which has been described as brutal this week. That is how stiff that competition is. Also brutal, of course, was the decision to bench Logan Sargeant last time out in Australia after Alex Albon crashed the Williams. Only one chassis because Williams don't have a spare chassis. Actually, I went up and down the pit lane today investigating. They're not the only team that don't have a spare chassis. There are others here in the pit lane that don't. But Williams, here's the crash for Alex Albon. Again, at that really tricky corner that also caught George Russell. It was a big impact. Tub had to go back to the UK. The tub has been fixed, Lawrence. But arriving here in Japan, Alex Albon doesn't have the fixed tub. The mended tub has gone to Logan Sargeant. Logan's perfectly pristine car from the start of the season stays with Alex Albon. Do you understand the reasoning behind that?
Well, you were talking to Logan earlier, so maybe you can kind of give a feel for like his mood at the minute.
Well, so Logan basically said, well, the team had already set up my car for Alex, and it would have taken them too long to have changed it back to me and then done the other car for. It took them a night in Australia, so I don't really buy that. I mean, look, he said he had some good time after Australia. He went to the beach, sat there, chilled out, but he did admit that actually the real weight of it had only really settled in those days after the race, because the emotions were so raw over the weekend, and it was only when he was able to kind of look back on it that he was able to really balance it in his own mind. But he says he's good, he's positive, wants to come here, make a good impression. And that good impression would be, I would imagine, scoring points, but we can hear from him now. Logan, I imagine Australia was a very difficult weekend for you. Actually, I can't imagine how difficult the weekend was for you. Obviously, emotions would have been raw at the time, but in the days after, how did you reflect back on that weekend, and how did you end up feeling about it?
Yeah, I think for sure the next day, couple days was a bit of felt a bit raw. But at the same time, I think, we haven't had the perfect start to the year, but in terms of speed, I'm happy with where I'm at. And I think I just need to, carry that into this weekend. But for sure, having a week off, I got to spend it sitting on a beach, but also getting some good training in, seeing things from a different perspective, and come back here feeling actually very fresh and psychologically happy, and just ready to get back in the car.
Does it make you question the team's confidence and faith in you that they took that decision when you were sat on the beach alone with your thoughts? Did that ever kind of creep its way in?
No, I don't think so. I think, I didn't have the easiest of years in 2023, and they stuck by my side. I believe I've had that support since the end of 2021, and I don't think it's gone anywhere. I think it's just a difficult situation for everyone involved. Difficult situation for even the mechanics who have to shift the cars all the way across. So it's tough, but at the same time I feel like I stepped away. I was in my own little bubble. I didn't really think too much about racing at all, and I think that was what I needed.
2 chassis in the garage at the moment. You've got your car back, or have you got the patched up one?
I have the patched up one, but a very well patched up one. The repair went better than expected, and should be exactly identical to what I previously had.
Should be exactly identical to what he had before, and they will hope with the rain that they don't damage it anymore, or the Chinese Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time will be something of a difficulty. Look, folks, it's Ariana Bravo. Hello, mate.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very happy to be back on Weekend Warm-Up.
And happy to be back in Japan. I know you've not been here for a long time.
No, I've only been to Tokyo before, never come to the race, so I'm very excited because everyone says this is one of their favourites.
It's immense.
You love it.
It's absolutely love it. Drivers possibly not loving it so much after Australia are the Sauber guys. You were speaking to them. Pit stop problems recurring.
Yeah, still not 100% resolved, which obviously that's not what they would have wanted to come here saying, but still not 100% resolved. Valtteri saying it's going to take a little bit more time, but feeling confident coming into this weekend more generally. Obviously the race pace was looking good for Valtteri aside from the pit stop issue, so I think he is encouraged by that, but if it happens again, then it's another good race, isn't it?
Another team with upgrades, of course, Sauber this weekend, a new floor for them. You get a feeling of positivity from the drivers that so early in the season they're making these strides, making these changes.
Yeah, both of the drivers did sound positive, actually. Zhou as well, they sounded optimistic. As a team, they seem to all sound quite encouraged by what they've seen in terms of the race pace specifically. It's just a case of getting a hold of that pit stop issue, and then I think we'll really be able to see where they sort of fall and how the team is all working together.
Let's move on to RB now, Lawrence Barretto, because they have a different driver in their car, not for the whole weekend, just for FP1. Iwasa, who many of you will remember from Formula 2, now plying his trade over here in Japan in Super Formula, will take Daniel Ricciardo's seat. So it will be him and Tsunoda for FP1. Yeah,
very cool to have an all-Japanese lineup for just one session. It would be good for the team to be able to evaluate him as well, because they've got 2 seats available for next year. Obviously, Yuki, Daniel will be hoping to retain those seats as a bare minimum. Liam Lawson's waiting in the wings, and we've said that Helmut Marko wants him in a car. So it's just a great opportunity to kind of evaluate Iwasa, but it's difficult for Ricciardo. Missing the first session of a race weekend when he's trying to build this rhythm through it, he's going to have to get it all together in FP2.
And he was talking today about the possible need to change the chassis in order to figure out if it's the car or if it's him. He used a word to describe his driving this year, which I can't repeat on television, but it wasn't a positive one. How hard do you think he's feeling this hit at the start of the year?
I mean, he's beating himself up at the minute about the kind of performance that he's delivering on track. He's pretty lost as to why he can't seem to get this RB to work. He's going to come here at a track that generally he'll feel a little bit more comfortable with, I think. So if he can kind of get the car working around here, that's a positive. But he's got to start outperforming Yuki Tsunoda as a bare minimum. At the moment, Yuki's delivering, one of the star drives performances of this year.
Well, he's nowhere near at the moment. A great statistic that I saw after Australia. Daniel's average qualifying gap to Yuki Tsunoda this year is identical to that of Nick de Vries over his first 3 races with AlphaTauri last year. It's an average of 0.4 seconds in qualifying. Yuki's doing a great job this year, Ariana.
Yuki's doing a fantastic job, and I think that is emphasising where Daniel is falling short. I spoke to Daniel earlier, and he was saying, I feel fine, I feel great, I feel confident, it's not a problem with me, like in myself I feel good. But when your teammate's performing as well as Yuki is, and with the mounting pressure and the people that are there waiting for the seat, like you've said, at some point it needs to click, and Yuki is doing a fantastic job in that seat. It's a really tough one, and Daniel said, I'm just focusing on speaking with my engineers. I'm not letting outside noise and outside opinions of how I should be doing things get into my head. But there's only 2 points between RB and Haas. At some point, you got to step up, haven't you?
Beautiful segue into the discussion on Haas, because they have been such a revelation at the start of this season. They really were nowhere for a lot of last year. A lot of worries on them with the change of team principal at the start of the season. But Ayo Komatsu doing a wonderful job there. They've taken their opportunities, scored points early on, Lawrence, and I don't know, for me, probably a surprise package at the start of the year.
Oh, definitely. Like, the start of the year, they were putting the bar way down here. They're like, we're not going to be scoring points. We're going to be tallying off the back of the field. And yet they are probably the best of the rest from a midfield perspective. And, Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen, even though he's not got the lion's share of the points, have worked really well together. They're getting the best out of this very compliant car at the minute. And they seem to have done a really good job with what they've got. And also, I seem to be learning from weekend in, weekend out. So actually coming here, I still think of the best of the rest, they're still the best chance of getting some points outside of the top 5.
And they've moved their development schedule forwards, I understand, and brought some more developments online much earlier in the season than they were due to be coming on board. You can hear from Ayo Komatsu and you can hear from Yuki Tsunoda later on this weekend. We're going to be talking to both of them. Right, this is where you can catch everything for the remainder of the weekend here on F1 TV, and it all kicks off, as it always does, with FP1, which comes your way 11:15 local time tomorrow. Then practice 2 at 14:45 local time, rolling us through into Saturday. Free practice 3 again at 11:15 and qualifying at 2:30 local, all of which brings us towards what may be a very wet and windy Japanese Grand Prix. 1 p.m. the Formula 1 MSC Cruises Japanese Grand Prix from the magnificent Suzuka circuit. All right, guys, final thoughts on the show today. We should probably do predictions, shouldn't we? Because that's how we normally close this show. Ariana.
Yes.
Have you prepared a prediction? I haven't even thought about predictions yet.
I haven't thought about it. What has been occupying my mind in the last few minutes is you talking about the weather so much for Sunday, which is really stressing me out because I've not packed accordingly. But anyway, predictions. Max Verstappen win.
Yep.
I think he's going to come back as a force after last time out. Charles P2, and let's go, I think a McLaren P3.
Love it. Which
McLaren.
one?
Let's say Lando.
Okay.
But, yeah, let's say Lando.
Love it.
So the obvious thing is to say Max Verstappen win, but I think
you're going to go rogue.
I was going to go rogue, because I'm going to put a McLaren in there. I think Lando Norris.
I was going to go there. I was going to go rogue with it, but you've done it.
It's going to cause grief in my fancy F1 team, because McLaren are so highly priced. You can't actually get both of them in and a Max Verstappen, so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. I might have to gamble and go big and maybe just focus on McLaren. Anyway,
okay.
We'll talk about this later on. So I think it's going to be...
put both Alpine drivers in.
Hang on, let's not get carried away. I'm going to go Lando, I'm going to go Max, I'm going to go Oscar.
Lovely. I think I'm going to go with a Lando win and a Carlos Sainz P2 and a Checo P3.
No, so no Max on the podium for the second successive race.
Yeah.
Bold.
I like the variety.
Bold.
Except for Lando in all of ours.
Right. See how wrong we end up being by following along on F1 TV for the rest of the weekend. This, folks, is always such a special Grand Prix, even more so at this beautiful time of year here in Japan. The Japanese Grand Prix really is one of the most special races of the entire season, and we can't wait for you to follow along with us all the way through this weekend. For now, though, from me, Ariana, and Lawrence, that is your lot. We'll see you tomorrow.
Welcome to Suzuka. My home race. See you on track.